Honestly, following the release of Pokemon Sword and Shield, I'm sure we were all expecting the routine $60 follow-up version to fix some of its issues coming later this year, but this is the best thing that's happened to the series in years. Let's talk about it. Pokemon's third versions have always been a near full price money sink, and it's a wonder that ever since X and Y, the series hasn't opted to go down the route of downloadable content instead. With the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra coming later this year, we have a lot to look forward to, and I can safely say that it's all thanks to two people at Game Freak that I have some massive appreciation for. If you've been watching my videos for a while now, you probably know I am a huge fan of Kazumasa Iwao, who's been working on the series since Black and White, and is most notable for his directorial work on 2017's Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. During the period leading up to that game's release, he expressed enthusiasm on shelving the follow-up releases in favor of downloadable content, and I have no doubt that his word was instrumental this time around. I also don't need to explain why this is a good thing, and I don't understand the issues with this method people have been talking about online. With previous generations, we would have had a year-long turnover for a game with minor changes built on top of existing content for double the price of the original. Crystal, Emerald, Platinum, and the Ultra games were refined versions of the originals, but it's abundantly clear that they struggled to add new content that didn't already have a place open for them in the region. This time, we get opportunities for entirely new level design around 2 mini regions for half the price of a new entry, and the best part is that we're getting them incrementally throughout the year as opposed to having us beat the whole game again in November just to access a few new post-game features. I've always liked the idea of bringing my existing team on new adventures just like I did going with Johto to Kanto in Gold and Silver, and these new areas are giving me exactly that feeling. I've praised the Battle Frontier and Ultra Warp Ride in the past, two late game additions provided by follow-up games that were enjoyable experiences, but ones that felt tacked onto the whole experience, as they were mostly added in at the end of those games' main stories. Though with the new rivals and characters this time around, it's clear that these two DLC packs open up a world of opportunities for the series on top of bringing back or revitalizing older game mechanics such as Apricorns. But I can't help but feel a little skeptical of their implementation for a variety of reasons. Whilst I'm happy that this has taken a step forward in terms of progression the series to a more consumer-friendly one that I'm sure also benefits Game Freak's rocky development structure in some way, there's a lot to be said about the notion that this content should have been in the base game released back in November. I can somewhat understand why people think this, but I also don't see this as any different to the way it always was, even as recently as with Gen 7. The follow-up content has always began development midway through the original game's development, though I think that it's even harder to make the argument that we're being milked for our money for content that should have been in the game in the first place when we willingly bought games like Emerald and Platinum. For the minor additions provided in those games compared to what we're getting with these DLC packs, it feels like a night and day comparison. 2 new mini regions full of 3D level design and all of these new forms and places to put them doesn't get done overnight, and it's definitely going to take a lot more time for those than a new version of the box art legendary and a couple of new areas and extras like we've had before. Patching what was effectively a smoother and quicker game with less pauses and waiting into Platinum going from Diamond and Pearl feels way more last minute and left over than adding 2 entire mini regions, land masses, whatever you want to call them. Granted, I'm a little skeptical of how they're implementing these new forms in Pokemon to an extent. Kubfu, Urshifu, and Calyrex aside, the Galarian forms of the legendary birds and whatever these new Reggie-Trio inspired Pokemon are, leave me a little conflicted. On one hand, I love their designs, they feel like modern interpretations of beloved Pokemon from games past, but on the other, I see them as more holes poked in the series' relatively strong commitment to providing context. The Pokédex has always been an important feature for me in this series. I like learning about the Pokemon, and I appreciate large parts of their designs that I wouldn't have otherwise. It exists for that reason, which makes me feel perplexed when it comes to these new Reggie Pokemon. Like, okay, so Regigigas is known to be a craftsman that created the original trio in ancient times out of inanimate objects, such as stone, ice, and magma. Since Regigigas came after the Hoenn trio, its design is based around them, the color of its gemstones representing the 3 that it created, and overall it's just a really cool Pokemon that got largely shafted from a gameplay standpoint because of its ability. Now, these electric and possibly even dragon type Regis feel out of place. Their creator no longer has any links to their design minus the markings, and they don't even appear to be based off of inanimate objects that could be literally molded into golems. I can kinda see that the electric one kinda, sorta, maybe looks like a light bulb? But when you consider that these Pokemon were created in ancient times, it starts to lose a bit of sense to me. Who knows though, when rushing through all the legendaries at the end they didn't show Regigigas, implying that there might be more to him in the Crown Tundra DLC, perhaps with an especially fitting Gigantamax form that could incorporate these new Regis into his design. And I know I just went off for about a minute on the context surrounding a bunch of ancient rock monsters, but the earlier games at least earned that talking point, and I can only hope that the newer legendaries being added to a group of older ones don't undermine the lore from those earlier games. You might not have noticed it, but your brain did. Alien-looking Pokemon that don't mesh well with the previously established theme can give credence to the idea that they're very surface level and only made to promote new DLC that desperately needs some support. Ask yourself, had you not seen the Regis, and let's say by extension the Galarian forms of the Kanto birds, would you have been just as excited about some new characters in a couple of wild areas? I'm looking forward to them either way, but there's definitely a lot to be said about how this information was revealed to us. I think the weirdly out-of-place Gigantamax Galar starter evolutions didn't mesh well with them being dropped in a new region too, which again could definitely make it understandable as to why people think this DLC is feeding us content that should have been in the original game, especially given that the last region starters got exclusive Z moves, which of course played off of the Alola region's gimmick, much like how these Gigantamax forms do with Galars. I can't imagine that bringing back a bunch of old Pokemon with this DLC helped with that notion either. We now know for sure that with the addition of Pokemon like Landorus, Therian, and the other legendaries, did Game Freak clearly not give a shit about balance or context when cutting the previous Pokemon, which was something that I addressed way back in June when news of the National Dex cut first broke. Irrelevant of that fact though, I'm glad to see some old faces back, and patching them into Sword and Shield even without buying the DLC is a fantastic touch, and a real surprise considering how they had never done it before with new Pokemon or forms when they easily could've. With new rivals, intriguing new Pokemon designs, and even a group of co-op dungeons located within some new regions, I am beyond excited for the Sword and Shield DLC. The series has finally made the jump to what they should have been doing back in 2013, and the future of Pokemon as a series is now riding on the success of these expansions. It really feels like we don't know what's coming next, which is both exciting and a little frightening too. As mentioned earlier, the second person aside from Iwao that I'm extremely satisfied with from Game Freak is the director of these expansions, Hiroyuki Tani. He's relatively new but reminds me a lot of Iwao in terms of his previous roles as part of the series staff. Let's just hope his aims to provide players with expansive, explorative mini-regions pay off. We're also 2 out of 3 on my favourite Pokemon coming back. Here's hoping we get a full house, I guess.